Welcome, everybody. This is the second conversation in our series we call Style at Work. And the vision of this series was to celebrate people whose life and work embody elements of the Markel style. And we are very lucky to have someone who does just that, Sam Reid. Sam is a native of Richmond, Virginia, graduate of James River High School and the University of Virginia. In 2016, he's a content creator with a company, Sam Reid Productions, and the Studio Review. In 2016, he had his first viral video success with a 5-year photo a day project that was featured on the Today Show. And then 3 years ago, he launched his business full time. He was recently recognized as a content creator on the rise on the YouTube homepage in 2023. And before we get started with our conversation, I want you to enjoy this highlight reel about Sam's journey so far.
All right, next up, a video that was 5 years in the making. YouTube user Sam Reid took a selfie every day for 5 years. That's 1,825 selfies. But check out what happens when the vocals kick in. See, it looks like he's singing along to the song. A different picture every day to line it up exactly with that song.
Well, it is day 3 of a month of nothing but Taco Bell.
3 full meals a day at Taco Bell every day for 30 days in a row.
Sam is trying to see if he can actually get healthier while eating fast food.
A man in Virginia said that he's going to eat only Taco Bell for 30 days to see if their food can make you healthier. Taco Bell is so excited. They're like, he called us food.
I'm really excited because today we're going to have maybe Taco Bell's biggest fan.
That's Mark King, the CEO of Taco Bell, and that's me. And if you had told me 8 months ago that he was going to ask to meet me, I never would have believed you.
Welcoming Sam Reid. Sam, I'm very excited about this. I think not only do you embody the Markel style, but I think you embody the very first sentence, which is striving, a zealous pursuit of excellence while keeping a sense of humor. And I must say, preparing for this interview, I laughed a lot, and I think you all will get to enjoy that. But this isn't what you started doing when you graduated from college. You started at a nonprofit. What was that work, and how did it inform what you would go on to do in the content creation space?
Yeah, so when I graduated from UVA, I started working for a faith-based nonprofit that did primarily outreach work with high school and middle school students. And so through that experience, it was incredibly fulfilling. But one thing that I learned, I'm sure many of you have heard statistics around historically high rates of anxiety, depression, even suicide among teenagers. And so working with these students on a very frequent basis, got to see that firsthand. And so I walked away with this sense of, I think, despair a little bit of like, what could we do to help encourage folks experiencing those things? And so as I eventually landed in this career, I thought a lot about what I'd want to offer. And so I think, I'm a proponent of spending less time online and not being like chronically online. I think that contributes to some of those issues. But I was like, if they are going to spend time online, I would love to offer them something that is actually going to leave them better off for having spent a few minutes with me watching a video. And so because of that, I landed on this kind of mantra or this phrase that I end every video with. And so it's silly. I mean, you saw some of the stuff that I do. It's pretty lighthearted. But at the end, I'll say, and just remember that even when it doesn't feel like it, it's going to be okay. Because I thought, hey, if there's one thing that I would want someone who's maybe in their darkest moment, they're watching a YouTube video late at night alone, like, hey, what's one positive thing I could leave them with? And so that's what I landed on.
I definitely got that feeling watching your videos. I sort of left it feeling a little more lighthearted. And one of the things we were talking about a while ago, and it sort of the first vibe I got was like a little bit of a Fred Rogers vibe. And then when I mentioned that, you said that he actually was an influence of yours. Can you talk about that, and who are the other influences of the content that you create?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, Fred Rogers, I feel like, is a hero of mine. I'm sure many of you have seen the Tom Hanks movie, but I recently, read his biography, and he and I actually share the fact that we have both attended seminary. So, working for that nonprofit, I had the opportunity to get a graduate degree focused in youth ministry, and what Fred Rogers kind of decided when he graduated was that his service was actually going to be through his television program. He thought that connecting with the youth of the time was the most important thing that he could offer. And so I've looked to him as kind of the gold standard for thinking through like what are his principles, what are his motivations. And I think on the internet right now, there's kind of this people, Tristan Harris, for example, people have called it the race to the bottom of the brainstem. Like, how can I just kind of capture your attention at any cost? And that wasn't his motivation at all. It was, how can I, again, leave the youth better off? So Fred Rogers, huge inspiration for me. And then I also am largely inspired by late night television. So I wear a suit in most of my videos. As you can see, I kind of host the show from a desk. And when I lived in Connecticut for a time while I was working for this organization, had the opportunity to go and attend a lot of late night talk show hosts in person. And so I got to see Jimmy Fallon. I was not there when he mentioned the experiment, unfortunately, but Trevor Noah, Stephen Colbert, SNL, and I feel like there was just something magical about getting to experience that in person. And I thought if I could capture some of that magic and convey it through the screen, that would be ideal.
And I did mention in the intro, which I meant to mention, his platform now has over 125,000 subscribers and rapidly growing, and over 25 million views across all of your platforms, which is to say a strong sense of mission and purpose, but this isn't a nonprofit. That it's a for-profit business that is growing and successful. When did you know it was going to become a business?
I think when I started doing this consistently, which was in January of 2021, I kind of had in the back of my mind, this could be profitable, this could be a full-time job, but it just felt so far off because YouTube actually has minimum requirements to become a partner in the YouTube Partner Program, which means you earn a cut of the ad revenue on those videos that they'll play before or during or after your YouTube video. So you have to have 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 watch hours, which was really, really high for me at the time. I was kind of doing this as a side job, just for fun, a hobby. I was publishing to like dozens of views at a time. So the idea of 4,000 watch hours over the last 365 days seemed insurmountable. So for the longest time, I didn't even qualify for revenue. I wasn't making anything. We moved back to Virginia a couple years ago. My wife took a job, and I decided to take a job that would kind of allow me to pursue this to hopefully get to the point where it could be a full-time job. So in traditional media, a lot of times you see actors, actresses take jobs waiting tables and things like that until they, make their big break. And that's kind of how I saw my jobs at the time. I was trying to put all my energy outside of work into developing this. And eventually, largely because of the Taco Bell experiment, which we can talk about, was able to meet those requirements, start monetizing on YouTube, make my first dollar through YouTube AdSense. And so making the leap to full-time, I wasn't actually completely there yet. I wasn't quite replacing my income at the time. I kind of sat down with my wife and said, hey, this is where I'd like to be. We kind of have this 3-month runway, and I'd like to give it a shot in those 3 months. And so it really was a risk saying, I'm not there yet, but over the next 3 months, I'd really like to put everything I've got into this and see if we can get there. And fortunately, that paid off. So I've been full-time on YouTube, making my income through content creation for about a year now.
Let's talk about the Taco Bell video, because you first became on my radar when Tom and I were eating at a Waffle House in Fort Mill, South Carolina, and he said, have you seen the Waffle House video? And that was 7 straight days of you eating every meal at a Waffle House, which is hilarious. But then my second video was 30 straight days at Taco Bell. How did that idea come to be? What was the origin story of that? And when you made it, did you know it would become the viral hit of your early content creation?
I think I'd hoped that it would become that, but there's really very little certainty when it comes to kind of creating viral content. And the origin of that was growing up in Chesterfield County Public Schools, the kind of MO for having a substitute teacher in health class meant that you would watch Super Size Me. You know, they'd wheel out the VHS TV on the cart, and you'd watch the documentary where Morgan Spurlock eats nothing but McDonald's for 30 days. And the takeaway is like, this is bad for you. Like, you are going to die. And it kind of came out later. There was some like sketchy stuff with he was like drinking heavily at the time, and he famously never released his food log and stuff. But it did have this massive cultural impact. Like, I feel like it was kind of a viral concept before YouTube even existed. So that was hugely successful. I didn't see that as something that was like gross or like appalling. I was like, I bet I could do that. So around 2016, this article comes out that says Taco Bell has become one of America's healthiest fast food restaurants. And I saw that and kind of paired that with this fascination with Super Size Me. And I'll say in content creation, there's kind of this idea of creativity, but also taking inspiration from other sources. And people say that you can steal like an artist, but there's kind of honor among thieves. So I didn't want to just do like a copy and paste of the exact same thing. So I really tried to make it my own. And the twist that I put on it, in addition to putting it on YouTube and kind of making it a little bit more homemade, was that I was going to try to see if I could actually test that hypothesis and become healthier over the course of 30 days. So ate nothing but Taco Bell, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, 90 total meals straight from Taco Bell. Wanted to make sure that I wasn't just like, starving myself. I ate everything on the menu at least once and did the whole gamut of health tests on the front end and the back end. So did, lipid panels, blood tests, body composition analysis, meeting with nutritionists, and shockingly, to my surprise and Taco Bell's delight, I ended up improving virtually every single metric that I tested over the course of 30 days.
So it is indeed healthy fast food.
I would say that it can help you on a healthy journey. Is how I would
Well, maybe talk about the Taco Bell partnership, because I bet when you made that video, you didn't envision you'd be talking to the former CEO, Mark King, and I know you've done subsequently projects with him after that. I know there are many investors in this room, and I've found YouTube to be a wonderful source for investment research, not only hearing CEOs talk, but how they engage with channel partners and marketing partners. I'm just curious what your experience has been like working with Taco Bell, which is part of Young Brands, which is publicly traded, and any takeaways for investors who might try to learn from you and other people that work with these brands about what that says about them as an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So initially, did reach out to Taco Bell, and I made several different attempts to get in touch, and looking back, like probably not the best channels to do that, but didn't hear anything. So understandably so, I'd imagine getting a cold email saying like, hey, I'm going to potentially put myself at risk using your product is not something that you want to respond to or sign your name on. But one thing that really fascinated me about Super Size Me is that Morgan Spurlock spent a large portion of the documentary trying to kind of get a response from someone at McDonald's. And I was like, that's kind of fascinating. I wonder how Taco Bell would respond to that. So in the video, I actually secure an interview with a woman named Missy Shapok, who is Taco Bell's in-house dietitian and has been kind of the driving force behind a lot of the improvements that they've made in their menu over the course of the last 10 years or so. And so that was a really cool part of the documentary itself. And then kind of separate from that, once the relationship had been established and the video had been published, they actually invited me to come out and tour their headquarters. I got to taste some unreleased items in their test kitchen, which was like a dream come true. And then, I sat down with Mark for an interview on his podcast, which is called Restless Creativity, and we just talked about the experiment and the origins of that. And so I would say that quick service restaurants can be really great partners in terms of working with content creators. It's tricky when it comes to sponsorship directly, and we can talk about revenue sources and that type of thing for my line of work. But I think for a lot of folks, any sort of formal relationship can call into question the authenticity of a review or an experiment like this. And so they, I think, wisely didn't necessarily sponsor this project or things that I've worked on since, because I think for the audience, it would seem a little bit gray as to whether, the results were as authentic as I, believe and support them being. So I will say that Taco Bell has a phenomenal online social media presence, and in terms of what you can learn from that presence about a company, I think that it really speaks to the level of trust a brand has with their audience, and you can kind of see that anecdotally in comment sections or how celebrated something is. And one thing that comes to mind is when a restaurant or a brand announces something new or like a change, you can typically see the depth of relationship with the audience based on how people respond to that. So sometimes there's kind of like this revolt, and you can see that maybe the relationship is a little bit more based on a give and take. Or you can kind of see fans that are like, hey, I'm going to support this brand no matter what. And a lot of times you get that with Taco Bell. They're famously always changing their menu. And there are people that are kind of Taco Bell diehards that are going to try whatever wild creation they come up with next.
That's interesting. I mean, we just for those of you that were in the previous panel, Tim O'Shaughnessy was talking about Graham Holdings' investment in restaurants, and I'd never heard of that distinction made, but he talked about the difference between restaurants and institutions, and the comment section of a YouTube video as maybe being a place to mine whether or not it's a restaurant or an institution is an interesting concept.
Sure. And you had mentioned, sorry to interrupt you, you had mentioned the Waffle House video. So after seeing the Taco Bell experiment, Waffle House actually ended up reaching out to me, and they were like, hey, would you have the interest in doing that with us? And so for, I think, obvious reasons, I didn't necessarily make it as health-focused with Waffle House. They're not claiming to be a healthy brand there. It was more, celebratory. I framed it more of like Shark Week, but for waffles instead of sharks.
Maybe it would help the audience whose exposure to the content creation economy might be a son or a daughter who interacts with it as a form of entertainment, or someone has it as a side hustle. What is the landscape today, and where do you see yourself fitting in at this new media channel? I would say, as a research analyst, I came across it studying Hershey, and one of the things that is happening in the chocolate world is Mr. Beast, who I know, I think you know or have some experience with, has launched a chocolate brand called Feastables that's actually taken a few points of market share in a very old industry. So it might just help to get a little more context of the industry as you see it and where you fit in.
Sure, and I'll zoom way out here. So just for context, the way that content creators make money is varied, but there are a few buckets. So I mentioned ad revenue from YouTube. That's a 45-55 split with YouTube, so the creator keeps 55% of that, and you have to qualify for that. And that varies depending on how many views you have, how long people watch your videos, etc. And then there are sponsored brand deals, which if you listen to podcasts, it's very similar, where the host will take a 60-second or 2-minute break to do an ad read, talk about a brand. So that's another form of revenue, and they'll usually pay the creator directly. That doesn't affect your AdSense on YouTube. And then outside of that, creators are trying to kind of diversify their income, and so a lot of folks are creating products. Some fortunately already have products and they're using YouTube or social media as a way to distribute that or market that. But other creators find themselves with these massive audiences and they're like, how do I monetize this? So Mr. Beast is a great example. He has created several different businesses, the most successful of which is this company Feastables. They make a Mr. Beast chocolate bar, which you may have seen in Walmarts and 7-Elevens. Like, they are doing mainstream distribution now. So when it comes to the landscape, I feel like my understanding of YouTube, and I totally get it, this is yours as well, is kind of like 8-year-olds and idiot teenagers who kind of stumbled backwards into this like platform of fame and influence. And that is true for some, but I would say that's a minority. The rest of the folks that are making a living from YouTube are much more entrepreneurial. And so you get these creators who are now thinking through these startup businesses. And so, yeah, it's really interesting to see Feastables. You see Prime Hydration is another popular one. And then there's like Chamberlain Coffee and a bunch of others. But it's mostly creators kind of trying to diversify their revenue streams to monetize their audiences. And, to the point of like a brand's impact, I think that speaks to the depth of connection with the audience. Like, there's this concept called having a parasocial relationship with a creator, where because you watch their videos, you feel like you have this connection with them. And so that's beneficial in a couple ways. So when brands choose to sponsor a YouTube video, the ROI is actually much higher than traditional media like a television ad, because these people watching these videos feel like they're not necessarily being read an ad, but they're being given a recommendation from a friend of theirs. And then the second piece of it is when creators launch their own products like Mr. Beast's chocolate bars. It's just such an easy yes for a fan, because they already want to support this creator, and not only are they going to get to do that by giving them, their dollar, but then also they get this physical, tangible product from someone that they've only really been able to interact with virtually. And so YouTube is still in its kind of early days. Like, creators are all over the place. It's still kind of the wild, wild west. But I do feel like in terms of the landscape, there is this cool startup entrepreneurial energy about it. And so, yeah, it's fascinating to see the way that these products are now interacting with legacy brands like, the Hershey's, or for Prime Hydration, competing with Gatorade. And I will say, I think that these products for the larger creators have had hugely successful launches. I think the test, and what will be interesting to see, is what is their staying power. So Prime Hydration, for example, I just read recently, actually had a lower year two than they did in their first year. And so, they've had enormous launches, but I think it'll be interesting to see 5, 10, 15 years down the road which ones are still on the shelves.
That's interesting, and I've never heard, you said parasocial, not paranormal related.
Yeah, that's right.
I definitely think that's true. I know there's some podcast personalities at the reunion here, and I read an article that suggested the hit rate that book recommendations get when recommended on a podcast that one listens to actively, and that is certainly the case in my own life. I think if someone that I trust and I've spent so much time with, from an audio standpoint, recommends a book, I'm very, very likely to buy it. I would be curious to hear, as you think about that landscape and you think about the evolution of Sam Reid Productions and Studio Review, what are some of the visions you have for where your business could go with regards to different monetization streams and just what you want to create?
Yeah, I think for me, I do have a smaller kind of merch opportunity. So I didn't necessarily want to create a merch line around my name. I didn't think people would really be interested in that. And so I've actually created like t-shirts, hats. There's a neon sign that features prominently on the set of my show that says it's going to be okay. And so I've made replicas of those signs that are available for purchase. So the merch for me right now is centered around this phrase, it's going to be okay. And so I think from my perspective, I would love to have something like that, like a product or something to offer to my audience. But I do want to stay grounded in that principle that I'd love to serve them. I want it to be something that's going to better their life, or make life feel a little bit lighter. So I'm still kind of in the think tank process of that, figuring out what that might be, because I really don't just want to get people to buy some junk that they're not going to find any value from. So product-wise, I'd love to diversify revenue in that sense, and it's really beneficial to have something direct with a customer, like a newsletter, because on YouTube we actually don't have access to contact information for our viewers. We just have their usernames when they subscribe or when they comment. So having something like a newsletter or customer list is really helpful in terms of maintaining that long-term relationship and moving it off platform. I think in terms of the show itself, I would really love to continue to grow. I think that as I think about these late night shows like The Tonight Show, you see a history of Carson and Leno and Fallon, and it would be amazing. This would be like a dream scenario. I'm not anywhere close to this, but it would be so cool to one day be able to kind of pass the baton to someone else who would then host the show, where it would become kind of a legacy brand. And we're seeing that for the first time now with some YouTubers who have created these programs that have this dedicated audience, but they're getting to the point where YouTube launched in 2006, and so they've been doing this for almost 20 years, and so they're getting to the point where they're trying to figure out, okay, how do I keep this thing alive without it being centered on me, the creator? And so there are YouTubers named Rhett and Link who host the show called Good Mythical Morning, and they've kind of created this larger parent company called Mythical, where they've now spun off a cooking show that's hosted by someone else. Or this guy named Matthew Patrick, who has this brand called Theorist Media, where he's hosted a show called Game Theory and Style Theory and Food Theory, where he's now retiring from those shows, but still continuing to operate at an executive level while other hosts come in. So that's my dream for the Studio Review, which is what I call my show, is I would love for it to be something that, one, has depth of connection with the audience and continues to impact them, and then two, maybe one day something that I could pass off to someone while still maybe staying involved at a executive or leadership role.
Well, you'll be happy to know I've recently purchased a It's Going to Be Okay hat. And the reason I like the hat is because not only is it about your business, but I feel like I'm representing the message you talked about at the outset, wearing that hat and the vibe that your videos create. So I'm excited to see where your product platform goes. I remember reading a book about YouTube creators, and one of the things that some of them mentioned was they worried about platform risk, that if you have all your eggs in one basket and the YouTube changes the rules, that creates some risks for the business. How do you think about that and manage that as you look to execute your vision?
Well, we're seeing that right now with TikTok, right? Like, there are creators who have built their entire business off of their TikTok presence. And so as that potentially becomes, unstable ground, they're looking to transfer their audience over to something like YouTube or another platform. So I think there are a variety of ways to do that. I think for me, the newsletter is huge. I do have a newsletter where I feel like I have kind of a deeper connection with my audience, and they're able to connect with me on a more regular basis. And then, we just think about YouTube as like building a business on rented land where the rules could change. It could potentially shut down at some point. Or maybe they, shift the revenue model as they're sharing with creators. And so the more that I can diversify, I think the better. And then two, when it comes to building this business, I just think about YouTube is kind of the distribution, but hopefully the product isn't only just the videos that people are watching. So I think, to kind of summarize, I think diversity in revenue streams and then the way that you're connecting with an audience is helpful.
That makes sense. And it's fascinating. I grew up watching TV on a tube box that sat on the ground, and now my 10-year-old and 6-year-old boy almost exclusively watch YouTube videos.
Mm-hmm.
It's that is their media platform. And I think it's hard for parents of my generation to even wrap our heads around that it's not linear cable, that it's not even streaming, that it's content creators like you. And so even though it might be rented land, it still feels very early days in that runway. You mentioned working with Taco Bell and how that was such a great experience. I imagine there are times where you bump up against partners that aren't so great to work with, and I'm not asking you to name names, but I think it's helpful for people studying businesses to maybe learn from you that when you partnered with certain brands or companies, what that taught you about them when it didn't go well.
Sure. So I have a pretty extensive vetting process. When it comes to brand deals, I work with a third-party agency, and so they broker that deal. They kind of negotiate and finalize the deal between myself and the brand to have that ad read, that insertion. And I end up saying no to a lot of these offers because I feel like I want to prioritize the brand image, the trust. And so I know anecdotally, for example, that I have friends who are 5th grade teachers that are showing my episodes to their classroom. And so when a brand like Manscaped approaches me, I'm like, that's not the best fit for a 5th grade audience. That's not necessarily what I'm trying to embody here. And so I've said no to a lot of brands, and I do try to do my research. So I try to I check out things like Trustpilot. I try to see other videos that have been sponsored by that brand to see kind of what the response is. Occasionally people will comment specifically about the brand. And so recently, I partnered with a brand that is very prolific in podcasts and YouTube, and there had been some controversy where they had some legal trouble. And so I felt like I did my due diligence to do my research and see are these problems still happening? Have they cleaned up their act? And even though I felt like they had done their due diligence on their end to really clean up their act and resolve the issues that had been brought to light in the past, what I found out after publishing the video was that in kind of the greater YouTube conscience, people heard that one thing 4 years ago and then they latched onto it. So they weren't necessarily up to date with the latest news with this one particular company. And so I got a lot of backlash in the comment section, like, I can't believe that you would stoop so low as to partner with this brand. And so I feel like it was really eye-opening for me to see. I can do my research, but I think it's also helpful to kind of see what the general perception of a brand is. And so for this particular brand, even though I feel like they were above board at the time, there was just kind of this lingering negative perception that ended up affecting my brand image because of association with this brand. And so I feel like going forward, I'm going to kind of double down on research on those brands that I could potentially work with in the future.
You mentioned fan reactions to some of your content. I mean, one of the things as I go on Twitter or X now to research for investing, and one of the things that you can't help but to notice in the comment section is just how vicious people can be behind the cloak of anonymity. And I just wonder, for someone that puts themselves out there like you do in such an admirable way, how do you deal with those comments when you see them? How do you process that?
Well, first of all, I'll say you're absolutely right. People can be just terrible over the internet, which you would be surprised at the things people feel comfortable saying. And sometimes it's not even behind the cloak of anonymity, which is wild to me. But I would say, yeah, for people that might be considering getting into this, maybe you have some involvement with running an account for a brand or something like that. But you definitely have to have a level of thick skin. And then also just setting up healthy boundaries. Like, I have all notifications turned off on my iPhone, so I'm not necessarily just being bombarded with these comments. And I also have heard advice from other creators that it's okay to curate your comment section. So what I mean by that is, like, yes, there's free speech. We want to celebrate that. We want to invite people to criticize and offer, feedback. But at the same time, I kind of have this loosely defined threshold where if I feel like someone crosses the line, there's this amazing feature on both YouTube and Instagram called hide user from channel. And so what that does is it essentially blocks them, but they have no idea. So they will, from their end, see themselves continuing to comment on your videos, but no one else in the entire world will see that comment. I won't see it, no other user will see it, and so they're kind of just shouting into the void from that point forward. And so I use that feature just liberally, and so if someone is particularly nasty or just, crosses that line in my mind, I will, add them to that list, and I won't end up seeing their comments again. But I do feel like, I just have to remind myself sometimes, first of all, like, my value and my worth is not found in people's feedback of me, so that's helpful to remind myself of. But then also just the fact that, like, hey, some of these are kids. Most of these people did not watch the entire video before commenting, and I think just reminding myself of that has been helpful. But there's definitely a level of having to grow some thick skin when it comes to that kind of thing.
And I imagine some of it comes from your conviction of purpose and mission, that you're doing good work.
Oh, absolutely. And I think to counter that, I will say the negative comments speak a lot louder than the positive ones, but I do kind of keep screenshots of the comments kind of affirming the positive impact that I've had. So in the Taco Bell video, for example, again, really silly concept, but I felt like I was able to kind of hide some veggies in there. No pun intended, with Taco Bell being healthy and having tomatoes now. But I think that the way that I talked about food, especially when it came to being healthy, was very deliberate and very careful because, again, working with high school and middle school students, I know how prolific disordered eating habits are. And so the last thing that I wanted to do was to get to the end of this 30-minute video and have someone think, oh, okay, I just need to eat way less, and then develop kind of this negative relationship with their food. And so I deliberately chose to speak to a dietitian in the documentary who had a very gentle approach to nutrition and helps people see food as fuel and not as the enemy. And so just little things like that have been incredibly encouraging when I get comments from people who are saying, like, hey, I'm recovering from an eating disorder, and this video was so refreshing to watch. Or this video actually helped me start thinking about my health in a way that I never have before. And similarly with the slogan at the end of videos, every once in a while I'll get a message or an email or a comment that just says, like, hey, I've been going through a really hard time, and I didn't expect to get anything out of watching you combine this meat from Chipotle with this taco from Taco Bell. But when you said that at the end, that really resonated with me. And so things like that I feel like have been really affirming and helped balance out some of the negative and harsh comments that I get.
Well, in watching your videos, I couldn't help to realize that, very admirably on the comment section at the bottom is the national suicide prevention number. And I can imagine you probably save lives with that. And that's very admirable. And, we've all been told the rule of, do what you'd be okay with being on the front page of the newspaper, but I can't help but to realize, it seems as if your work at that nonprofit, your adage is make sure that population of middle and high school students would be better off for seeing the video, and that's a powerful filter. You never know who's going to be watching this someday, so what would be your pitch to a brand that you haven't worked with, and what are some of brands that you admire and that you would love to work with one day? Are there any that are sort of dream partners, and what would you say to them and why they should work with Sam Reid?
Well, I think that the pitch can be both quantitative and qualitative. So quantitatively, I'm able to give brands just way more data than any of us could ever care to pay attention to. But YouTube is actually really good about providing creators with that data, the analytics. And so we have data not only about subscribers and average viewership and things like that, but also we get a view retention graph on the back end. And so we're actually able to see what percentage of viewers are still watching at any given point of the video. And so that's one just interesting nuance to making content on the internet is when you go to a movie theater, you've paid your $19 or whatever movie tickets cost these days, and you've invested the next 2 hours to watch this movie. And so there's a pretty high barrier to actually getting up and leaving the movie theater. But when it comes to YouTube, there is virtually nothing preventing you from clicking away or watching something else. And so I think the most compelling storytellers are the ones who are able to kind of keep that high retention throughout a piece of content. So we're actually able to share that retention data with brands. And so I would share with a brand, like, I actually have incredibly high retention across videos, including during the ad read segment. Like, people aren't skipping ahead. We can see it drop a little bit, but for the most part, the majority of viewers are watching as I deliver this ad read. I think more importantly, though, is the qualitative information, and that deals with the depth of relationship I have with the audience, and I think that would be more anecdotal. Some of the things that I hear in the comments section or that people say to me, and I feel like, again, even though this Taco Bell video was not sponsored by Taco Bell, I don't know, if I had to guess, maybe a quarter of the comments are like, man, I think I'm going to Taco Bell tonight, And so there is just this tie of, having a fun experience tied to this brand does inspire viewers to take action, to make a conversion, whether that's clicking on a link or buying a product using a discount code. When it comes to dream brands, I have in my mind this tier of legacy brands that I describe internally at my one-man production studio as A-list brands or North Star brands. And for me, those are like the Coca-Colas of the world, the Nikes, Disney, brands like that I think have this kind of legacy impact. And part of that would be validation for myself. Like, I would love to be on the tier that they view partnership with me as a valuable investment. But also, I think that those are the types of companies that share a similar ethos. They have gotten to the level they've achieved because, over the course of many, many years, they have, for the most part, upheld this standard of ethics, and they have done business well. And so those are the types of brands that one day I would love to partner with. Not all of them have entered into the YouTube space or sponsored videos. And I know in preparation for this, we kind of talked about what types of brands even get involved with YouTube, and you kind of see a wide spectrum there, but some of those legacy brands aren't quite there yet in terms of YouTube sponsorships.
I will say, during the time that your video came out, same-store sale comps at Taco Bell were very strong. They've since tapered off a little bit. So I want to leave time for questions. I have more for Sam, but I might just pause here to see if there are any questions for the audience, because I know this is probably sparking a lot. So I know we have a microphone runner right here. Does anybody have a question that they'd like to ask Sam? And maybe while we're waiting for some questions, I'm curious which of the legacy brands that you aspire to work with, what are some of the things they're doing on YouTube today that they're there? Is Nike there, Coca-Cola there, that you say, wow, that's really cool? Or In which way might they not be there yet?
So there are definitely brands that are better positioned to kind of have an online presence. And so Nike's a great example where it's like a very aspirational brand for athletes or people that enjoy athletic pursuits. And so because of their partnership with athletes and their presence in the sports world, they kind of have this built-in content that they're able to produce. And so they have a very successful YouTube channel. Red Bull kind of famously is like now an extreme sports company that sells an energy drink. And so they have a very popular YouTube channel. So I view kind of a couple different categories when it comes to those brands. One being brands that have content to provide and they kind of naturally are able to just put that out there. And then the other ones have to work a little bit more where they might not be positioned as well to have this built-in content. And so they kind of have to get creative about what does their YouTube presence look like. So for example, Mountain Dew under PepsiCo, I'm like, I say this in all humility, but I'm like regularly outperforming Mountain Dew's videos, even though financially, they are leaving me in the dust. But in terms of their YouTube presence, they haven't quite cracked the code for that.
Interesting.
Yes. Thank you, Sam, for this. This is very informative. Can you give me a little more detail on the economics of merchandise? Because I find it very interesting. One, because my son, 13 years old, loves to buy merchandise from YouTubers. A sweatshirt at $100 a pop. But I just want to understand first the economics and how that really works with YouTube or how it works with you. And secondly, how do you think about pricing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there are kind of a couple different avenues you can take with that. So now, because there are so many YouTube creators, there are third-party companies that say, hey, let me handle this for you. And so in those instances, pricing is a little bit out of our control. I currently handle stuff in-house. And so I wrapped and sent Tyler's hat the other day. Arriving soon. I saw that name on the shipping label there. So when I think about pricing, I'm looking out for a quality supplier, someone that I trust, that I feel good about the quality of the product. And that's an interesting thing too, is I think a lot of YouTubers are kind of getting into this product realm without any anticipation for the customer service piece of it. So I'm getting these neon signs from a supplier, I'm having them custom made, and kind of for the first time, I've dealt with a couple of them, but they arrive and they stop working after a couple of days. And so that's been helpful for me. Personally, I feel very strongly about providing something that is of high quality, that will last for a long time. And then I don't know that this is the case for everyone, but I have seen those absurdly priced sweatshirts or bags of candy. And I'm thinking, what's something that would be reasonable for a high schooler, for example, or a middle schooler to pay. And so I'm trying to keep margins, I'm trying to keep overhead low to help it be a profitable business. But for me, because my primary revenue is from the brand deals, I feel like merchandise serves as more of a builder of depth with my audience than it does as a driver of revenue. I think if I ever got into like a product specifically, I'd think a little bit more critically about that. But for me, I'm less concerned with the profit margins at this point. Thank you for your question.
I think I saw the mic right there.
Hey, Sam. So, thanks for coming today. How do you think about strategy in terms of releasing videos, timing of videos? Like, how often do you see, or how often do you almost have an idea and that's what you do for the next month? Or is it more you have 50 ideas and you're planning out the next 2 years?
Yeah, I think it varies widely, specifically with my content, where I try to just keep a running list of ideas that I could execute on. And usually I'll take those a couple steps down the road. And generally after some research, it becomes clear whether this is going to be a viable idea or kind of aligns with, what I'm trying to go for. Or the other option is that I get a few steps down the road and I'm like, this is actually not going to be the video that I thought it was. So in terms of frequency, I'm now a little bit constrained by the brand deals that I've signed on to work with. And so we kind of agree on a release date for that. And I've tried to create a frequency that's a balance between healthy for me, where I don't want to just be editing around the clock and have no work-life balance, but also frequent enough that I feel like I'm getting regular touch points with my audience. I feel like the same is true for brands too when it comes to content strategy, where you don't want to be overwhelming them, you don't want to be annoying them coming across their feed too many times in a given week, but you also want to have enough touch points where you are top of mind and you're not just totally forgotten. And so right now that frequency is usually 2 to 3 videos a month for me, and I kind of try to balance these longer term projects with some one-offs. So Tyler and I were talking, I'm currently trying to try the best wings in every state in the United States of America, and I've done about 24 states, so I'm under halfway. I still need to go to Alaska and Hawaii, which will obviously be a huge time investment. So hoping to get some of those regions completed this summer, but in the meantime, I'm also filling in content that could be completed in Virginia. So I currently live in Lexington, Virginia. And that's another thing, we talked about this briefly, but some folks in entertainment move to New York or LA, but the largest creator on the platform, who's Mr. Beast, actually lives in Greenville, North Carolina. And so, it's just further proof that with YouTube, you kind of have access to everything you need in a place like Central Virginia.
Had I known before today you were doing the Wings project, maybe we'd do that other YouTube creator who does progressively hotter wings.
Yeah, that's right.
Interview. That's right. I think I saw the microphone.
Yep, thank you. And I'm also very nervous now to see if my husband wants to do the 30-day Taco Bell challenge. And now wings. So yes, that's him right there. But question for you around, what do your mentors and advisors look like in this type of space? And you mentioned your other backgrounds that you've had, so just interested in who you've sought out to seek advice and you grow in this space.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a moving target because YouTube is so new, there aren't a ton of folks who have gone the distance and made it into a sustainable career. And so I've actually looked to platforms where other creators are being interviewed and tried to learn as much as I can from those interviews. There are these guys named Fallon and Samir that kind of have the how I built this of the YouTube world. So they will interview creators about how they got to the place they are and kind of what their sources of revenue are and that sort of thing, the business model behind their YouTube channels. So a lot of it is kind of self-taught via these these interview shows and things like that. And then I also try to just incorporate general business advice, but in terms of like a physical mentor of someone that I'm meeting with on a regular basis, I'm still, kind of on the lookout for that. But I do, for example, Donald Miller, who wrote Blue Like Jazz, kind of has this marketing framework called story branding that positions the brand not as the hero, but as kind of the guy, the Obi-Wan Kenobi of the story, and the customer is the Luke Skywalker. And so that's been hugely influential in how I position my show. So try to take as much inspiration as I can from other creators and then also the business world.
Good morning, Sam. This is so fascinating on so many levels. Can you talk a little bit about ad spend? How much revenue that you're actually investing behind each video versus a viral? How are you managing that? And even down into percentages if you want to get really nitty-gritty, which I think I'm not the only one who'd be interested in.
Sure. So if I'm understanding your question correctly, like when it comes to an ad deal, how much of that?
I'm sorry, how much ad spend are you putting behind each video on YouTube? I mean, are you promoting your videos?
Oh, that's
a
phenomenal question.
Pushing it out or just hoping it's viral?
It's actually 0%. So yes, so the YouTube algorithm, for those that may not know, kind of factors in a few different things. But for us, the main things we're focused on are click-through rate, which is YouTube takes the data of everyone that's shown your title and thumbnail on the YouTube homepage, and we're getting a percentage of how many of those people actually click through to watch that video. And so for us, that title and thumbnail, that's our movie poster. So if we can kind of create a curiosity gap or give them an opportunity to be invested just from the get-go, that's huge. And then from there, kind of those first 30 seconds are where you really want to loop the viewer in. So there's no paid promotion. I do try to kind of cross-promote my videos on other channels. So on my Instagram, for example, I'll post about the latest YouTube video. And in that circumstance, I would credit that cross-promotion to some of the success of the Taco Bell video. The Taco Bell video currently has 2.5 million views, but it didn't start out that way. It actually had about 5,000 views for the first 3 months of its life. I then went to Instagram, re-edited some of the footage and attached it to some trending audio, That video got 11 million views, and it just had a simple call to action at the end. It wasn't even spoken, it just said in text on the screen, full documentary on YouTube. And because of that, folks who saw that short, that reel on YouTube, or excuse me, on Instagram, went over to YouTube, started searching for 30 days of Taco Bell, and that kind of told the YouTube algorithm, this is something people are interested in. And so in that sense, it's a little bit of a gamble where I have an idea of what's going to create something successful. Now that I have an established audience, I can kind of count on a base of viewers, but there is an element of it where it's unpredictable. And so when it comes to working with brands, I can say, hey, this is my average, but you actually might get a crazy good deal because you're giving me an ad rate, but this video just hits the algorithm in a way that's going to give you a lot more exposure than either of us kind of bargained for.
I know actors talk about, they worry about being typecasted. Is there a way in which the algorithm and the virality typecasts you within the food space? And is it hard to get a success outside of that realm?
I would say so. I think, so obviously my most successful video is this Taco Bell experiment. I very deliberately did not make my next video, I ate nothing but this for X amount of time. I did follow up with, the Waffle House, and I did one with the Dollar Tree where I tried $1.25 ribeye, which was, an experience. But I didn't want to typecast myself or pigeonhole myself into a specific genre. I will say when it comes to food, I generally stay within, the food niche here. But I do think it will be a challenge. I would like to branch outside of food-related content, and I do occasionally. And that content usually underperforms compared to my other content. And so I think once I have a little bit more of an established following or audience, it'll be a little bit easier, but it'll definitely be kind of a slow turn of the ship.
Thank you for sharing your story today, Sam, and I greatly appreciate the mission. One question that I have is somewhat as a segue to what Tyler just asked. In financial services, could you see a viable way to replicate what you're doing given the regulatory environment that we operate under, whether it be wealth management or insurance services or what have you? And maybe to that point, would you partner with a financial services company, and what would be the things that you would look for from a branding standpoint?
Yeah, great question. So I will say that in general, like if you were to look at it as a category, some of the financial, I would lump like real estate into that, is highly successful on YouTube, and those actually have some of the highest ad rates from Google because they know that the folks who are watching those videos are very specifically interested in one thing, and so brands that offer financial services are willing to pay higher premiums to Google, to Alphabet, in order to access a highly specific audience. And so in a lot of ways, the more specific YouTube knows an audience is, the higher they're able to sell their ads for. When it comes to personally working with like a financial institution or financial services, for me, partially with my vetting process, I would say, to take it out of finances for a second, like when it comes to food or supplements or something, I try to stay away from anything that could potentially have like questionable claims. Like if a supplement is saying that they're going to do X, Y, and Z for you, and that feels a little dubious to me, I'll try to stay away from that. And so when it comes to financial services, I think money is obviously, one of the reasons we're all here, but I feel like it can be something that could be detrimental to maybe someone that isn't super well off financially, takes a risk because they trust me as their favorite content creator or something like that. And so when I'm vetting a brand like that, I would definitely be open to working with them. I've worked with brands like Rocket Money, but I do try to do my due diligence and make sure there aren't any like claims of, getting rich quick or something like that. So I don't know if that is specific enough to answer your question, but I think there's definitely room for it. But personally, I try to just really vet to make sure I'm not over-promising.
How did the Rocket partnership come to be?
They reached out to me, and so that was an inbound request from them. They're pretty prolific when it comes to YouTube sponsorships, and so they're kind of already in the space. Usually a brand will kind of give me either their product or like a free trial of their service, and then I'll just kind of talk about my experience with that. That's a great question.
Hi, Sam. Thanks for sharing. I think like most people, I often find that I'm my own biggest critic, and when I'm creating content, whether it be the sound quality or my personal delivery, and then what's supposed to be like a 5-minute video ends up into an all-day project. Can you elaborate on how you overcome those hurdles?
Sure, and that I would just want to say entirely relatable to my experience too, where when I first started was really focused on making things as good as they could be, and so I'd spend way more time than I intended on some of my videos. But now, when I look back at what I call season 1 of the studio review, I like kind of cringe watching it. I'm like, I can't believe I put that online. Like, that was so bad. But people in the YouTube space and the content creation space advocate for the rule of 100, where it's really tough to accurately evaluate yourself until you've put out 100 videos. So even if they're bad, even if they're not quite at the quality that you feel like you're proud of or is your best work, I would recommend just getting the repetitions in and putting that out there. And eventually, even though I thought that these videos were like the best thing ever, you'll be able to look back and see how much you've improved. And I think that some of that comes down to comfort on camera, speaking to the lens, comes down to editing, kind of developing your voice. That's a huge thing in your editing style. So I think that the repetitions in that are huge.
Just want to say thank you for the sense of benevolence that we get in watching your content. Is there any sneak peeks you can give us going forward?
Oh, yeah, I would love to. So I will say I'll share a project that I just released that I'm very proud of, and then a few upcoming projects. So I actually, this is like incredibly silly. So in that Dollar Tree video, I'm reviewing this $1.25 ribeye, and I made just this offhand comment, wasn't even thinking about it. I was like, I mean, it's not something that you could serve at an Outback Steakhouse because I wouldn't want to offend my Australian viewers, knowing full well that Outback Steakhouse is a Tampa-based organization, is in the U.S. And Australian viewers got so upset. They're like, we have nothing to do with Outback Steakhouse. How dare you? We don't even have Outback Steakhouse in Australia. As it turns out, there are actually 8 Outback Steakhouses in Australia. So in kind of a petty way to poke fun at that, I actually flew to Australia and ate at an Outback Steakhouse to get the authentic Australian experience. And then for the second half of the video, I actually explored traditionally Australian cuisine. So that's a project that came out recently that I'm very proud of. And then I would say in terms of upcoming, I'll definitely have some more of the wings videos coming out soon. And then, I think one that I'm working on the logistics of for right now, there's this recurring joke in the show How I Met Your Mother where Ted and Marshall, 2 of the characters, go to Harlem Globetrotters games and root for the Washington Generals, which is the team that they play and have famously lost almost every single game. And so I'm working on going to both a Harlem Globetrotters game and then a Savannah Bananas game and just being like the biggest fan for the other team. And that will likely be a partnership with like a ticketing app, which will work out really well. So I'm working on doing that this summer.
Hi, Sam. Thank you again for speaking to us. Going back to merchandise, I know you said you never wanted to really center your merchandise around you and your name. I feel like that's kind of hard as a musician. So, like, what exactly was your strategy as to what you were going to put on your site and what phrase or what was going to be there for the merch?
Yeah, I think so. I would say, definitely being a musician is slightly different. So you very much, as a musician, would form a brand around your name. And I own merch from musicians that just has their names on it. And so I'm a big proponent of that as well. But I think it probably comes down to what's something that your audience or your listeners would be excited about. And so, like Tyler mentioned, like being able to be a part of kind of sharing that message was something that he connected with. And I think, for a musician, the question would be like, would they just be excited about being a fan? Is that part of their identity? And I think that's reason enough to buy merch with someone's name on it. Personally, I just, that wasn't at the top of my list. And I don't think that, I have like the coolest name. I don't know. It just doesn't like brand well, but I think musicians can do that very well.
Well, with that, it's the end of the hour. I feel like we could go all day. Thank you for your zealous pursuit of excellence, your creativity, your sense of humor. Join me in thanking Sam Reid.